Actually, IFRS 9 doesn't define loans and receivables. It's really a phrase that we use to describe non-derivative financial assets where the holder has a right to cash. Think things like trade receivables, long-term loans, investments in government and corporate debt. It might also include things like investments in mandatorily redeemable preferred shares or redeemable units, like the ones issued by mutual funds or REITs. It's important to note that the new requirements apply the same to loans and receivables within a group as they do to those due from third parties. That's a point that can be easily missed, and it's an important one because oftentimes we have conditions that we give to related parties that we wouldn't give to others, and those terms could affect classification and measurement. Let's start with the requirements you need to meet for measuring loans and receivables at amortized cost, which is everybody's favorite. There are two criteria. One relates to your business model for holding the instrument, and the other to the cash flows that the instrument generates and whether they represent what we call solely payments of principal and interest, or SPPI for short. It all goes down to the accounting that you do under amortized cost. That involves recognizing a loan or receivable at its principal amount plus any interest income that's accrued over the life at a constant rate. Of course, that accounting only makes sense when your objective is really to hold the thing to collect the principal and interest. The second test looks at what the instrument is going to give you and whether the cash flows are purely interest and principal or whether there are unusual things, the fair value of which really ought to be captured and reported. For example, think of a loan where the principal amount is tied to a commodity price or equity price. Only if both of these tests can be met can you record the loan or receivable at amortized cost. In some cases, you might be holding to collect the contractual cash flows, but you might also sell, depending on the circumstances. Think about a bond where you might be holding, but you could be inclined to sell if the fair value moves beyond a certain range. In those cases, as long as you pass the SPPI test, the instrument's carried at fair value through other comprehensive income, rather than fair value through P&L or amortized cost. Embedded derivatives are still around for financial liabilities and non-financial hosts, but you might be asking yourself how this new SPPI cash flow test for financial assets interacts with those requirements. The answer is it doesn't. It replaces them. Remember that the board was trying to simplify it, and so instead of separating embedded derivatives and measuring them at fair value apart from their hosts, they decided that you should look at the cash flows of an instrument on an overall basis. If the cash flows are sufficiently pure, then you're able to classify the entire instrument at amortized cost or fair value through OCI, depending on your business model. On the other hand, if there are enough of these features that modify the cash flows, then the whole thing has to go to fair value through profit or loss, rather than splitting it apart. That's important because it means that you could end up with more volatility in your income statement. Take, for instance, a loan where the interest payments are linked to the price of gold. Currently, you'd separate the gold price derivative at fair value each period, but the rest of the loan, think about things like credit risk, time value, and so on, aren't being remeasured. Under the new requirements, they are. That means we've got more stuff going through the income statement each period, even though the instrument hasn't changed.